You know, it's interesting. When Debbie and I were heading to the Weir football game on Friday night, we were going down Main Street, and we passed the sign out in front of the church with the sermon title, "Even the Right Can Be Wrong." When she saw it, she said, "Is the sermon going to be about me?" You see, she's right an awful lot of the time. But I told her it wasn't. It's just something that I think we've all seen happen from time to time. And when some very smart people make some pretty dumb predictions. Now, let me give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Now, we all know about Thomas Edison, right? You know, the light bulb guy. Well, he really didn't think one of his other inventions had a great future. Not when he said, "I have determined that there is no market for talking pictures." Or take Albert Einstein, not much fashion sense, but a pretty smart guy. He said, "There is not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable." Or Bill Gates, we all know Bill Gates. In 2004, he said, 2 years from now, spam will be solved. And those are just 3 examples. If you Google it, you'll come up with a whole lot more, all of which point to a very simple truth. Even the right can be wrong. As a matter of fact, I think we've got a great example right here in the passage we're looking at this morning. Now, if you were here last week, I think I'm safe in saying that this was Peter at his very best. Remember what we talked about last week? This is what Matthew wrote. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Now, that's what he said, and based on Jesus' response, we know he nailed it. And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Without a doubt, this was Peter's finest moment. To say he was just right, man, that would be an understatement. But then to show that all fame is fleeting and even the right can be wrong, the story continues. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Now, if this business about getting the keys to the kingdom and this binding and loosing was the kind of stuff Peter might want to put on a future resume, based on what this guy he had just confessed as the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God said to him, well, I imagine this was something Peter would like to file away as a bad dream. It was certainly not anything that he wanted to hear. And yet it wasn't a nightmare. It happened. This disciple who had been so incredibly right in answering the question, "But who do you say that I am?" Man, he was right on the mark there. In the very next thing Matthew wrote, did something so incredibly wrong that he was called both Satan and a stumbling block. You see, somewhere between this great confession and his decision to rebuke, in other words, to dress down and to chew out Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of the living God, Peter got distracted. Something distracted him from acting like he believed that he actually was talking to the Christ, the Son of God. Of course, this isn't the first time something like this happened to Peter. I mean, just like he did earlier in this story, when he was trying to walk on water, he took his eyes away from Jesus. But this time, he didn't just sink. He was actually throwing a temptation at Jesus. One as real and as dangerous as the stuff the devil used to test him in the wilderness. You see, Peter got distracted, and as a result, he missed two essential truths, one about why Jesus came, and two about how his followers are expected to respond. And that's why Jesus had to tell Peter that his place was behind Jesus' back, not in his face. And I'll tell you, I believe that's something we need to remember, because I think the same kind of thing can happen to us. In other words, we can become so distracted that we miss what is still fundamental about why Jesus came and about how we can respond. And even though Matthew didn't write about what distracted Peter, I think we've got a pretty good idea about what distracts us. I mean, let's get real. When it comes to faith in Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, Christians often become distracted from the truth when life becomes either too good or too bad. For example, when things seem to be just falling into place, man, life is easy, it's great, we're getting what we want, we're happy. Often Christians start talking about how they're being blessed by God. You know, like they deserve just to soak it in, and it's God's job to turn on the shower. Folks can be distracted by the good. On the other hand, though, when things turn south, well, God must be dumping on them, right? Because obviously they're doing something wrong. Now understand, neither conclusion flows from trusting that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. No, it comes from our desire to put ourselves in the center of the story. You know, as the leads in this little drama or comedy we call life, while God is just rearranging the scenery. We just want to believe that it's all about us, that we have control. And as a result, we become distracted from the one who's actually in charge. And that's why we end up misunderstanding what that story is all about. And I'm talking about why Jesus actually came, something about which he was clear. Remember, Matthew wrote, from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. But not just that, we also miss how he wants us to respond. When Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what he has done. Now, granted, this isn't the kind of thing most Christians want to hear. And ask any preacher writing a sermon on the first full day of college football. It's easy to become distracted when you'd rather hear or do something else. Still, it's what the one whom we say we're following taught. Therefore, if we kind of skim over it and then go on to something else and then reshape our faith and a response into a form that's more comfortable, well, I don't think we're any better than Peter. That's what he did. That's why he rebuked Jesus. And just remember what Jesus called him. You see, even though our words may be right, the way we interpret and choose to live them, man, that may be dead wrong. But here's some good news. I don't think that has to happen. You see, I believe we can avoid Peter's pitfall, and we can do it by focusing on something that Peter just didn't have. And I'm talking about what's found right here in this book. In other words, if we're serious about avoiding the distractions that we're constantly either running into or creating for ourselves, we can decide to study up on what Jesus actually said. What a radical thought. And not the stuff we wish he had said. You see, we can dig into what he actually taught by digging into the Bible. And when we do, we're going to learn a lot about why he came. I mean, what he said here wasn't the only time he talked about his purpose, his future on earth. According to Matthew a little later, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And on the third day he will be raised. And they were greatly distressed. And then again a little later, while Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves and said to them on the way, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. And on the third day he will be raised." You see, this is why he came. This is why he came. And as to how we might respond, just remember the story of the rich young man. Then someone came to him and said, "Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?" And he said to him, "Why do you ask me about what is good? There's only one who is good. If you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments." He said to him, "Which ones?" And Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother. Also you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The young man said to him, "I have kept all these. What do I still lack?" Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." When the young man heard this word, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. This is how we can respond. And also remember, right before his death, Jesus told the people exactly what God expects of all of us. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." That's also how we can respond. Now, I know it's not exactly a life of health and wealth and happiness, and yet this is what Jesus taught. And you know, when we read it and trust that it's true, and we do it with the same dedication and devotion with which we trust all the good stuff about love and grace and salvation, I think two things will happen. First, we'll understand the one we claim to follow a whole lot better. I mean, we'll see him as so much more than some kind of divine vending machine. You know, deposit a prayer, push a few buttons, and boom, out pops a blessing. Now, that may reflect how we'd like to see him, but when we read the word, we're going to find that he's so much more than just that. Instead, we're going to understand that in Jesus, God came as one of us so that we could understand him and he could completely identify with us. And that while he was here, he endured the depth of human pain and doubt, and that on the cross the universe was shaken, and when he was raised, he got a glimpse of the future, our future. We got a glimpse of the future. You see, when we decide to study up on why he came, our understanding of him has got to increase. That's one. And second, when we really take seriously the kind of lives Jesus has called us to live, I've got to believe the world around us is going to improve. I mean, just think about it. Suppose we make the conscious decision that it's no longer going to be all about ourselves. About what we have and about what we want and about what we think. In other words, suppose we decide to put ourselves second instead of first, and to listen when we'd rather talk, and to show our neighbor the same compassion and kindness and generosity we show ourselves. Suppose this is our decision. Now you tell me how that won't improve the lives of others. I'll tell you, the world is going to get better when we're clear about what following Jesus is all about. And that's the second thing that'll happen. I have no doubt that people who are generally right will continue to be wrong from time to time. I mean, how else can you explain Charlie Chaplin saying that the cinema is little more than a fad? It's canned drama. What audiences really want is to see a flesh and blood actor on the stage. Of course, we shouldn't be too hard on him. I mean, he never had the chance to see an Adam Sandler movie or watched a single episode of The Bachelor. And with Peter, well, I think we can find an excuse for him too. You see, although his initial confession was right, he certainly became distracted and failed to understand why Jesus came and how his followers are expected to respond. But remember, he didn't have the advantages we have. For example, when we feel a distraction coming on, we can open our Bibles and read a lot of stuff that Peter just didn't have. And when we apply what we've read, I'm telling you, not only will our understanding of Jesus grow, but the world around us will improve. And I believe that's going to happen in spite of the fact that we'll probably always live in a place where even the right can be wrong.